Basically, what we were trying to do is offer an alternative at the time, particularly around the coronavirus rules. We believed fundamentally that free speech, freedom of our independence as individuals was being curtailed, and we felt that needed challenging. But it's also about looking at how we reset politics a bit, how we think outside the box, and how we try and get out of the rut that politics seems to have got into, and particularly in Scotland, where everything seemed to be about independence. I mean, even the opposition parties use independence as their campaigning slogans, and we felt very much that they were ignoring the things that were really important to people, which were, our day-to-day healthcare needs, social care needs, the failures in education, the failures in the transport system. And instead, everybody's dancing to the Yes Movement's tune. So it was time to kind of rethink that, because really, unless you offer a good programme for government, the SNP are going to be in power forever, basically.
So if the SNP do get their way, what do you think it means for the UK if Scotland does leave?
Well, I think it matters on both sides of the border. We are an island. We're not a terribly big island. Scotland is 33% of the landmass of the UK, albeit it's only 8% of the population and 8% of the GDP. So we are big on land and small in population and impact of the overall activity across the UK. But it would make a difference, and it would affect particularly things like the perception of the world. I think the rest of the UK would recover from that, but I think in the short term, there would be sense across the world that something had gone wrong in the UK. Because if you look across, there aren't lots of examples of one country breaking up into pieces when they've been in a union for such a long time, and where everything is intertwined. And it is worth bearing in mind that the majority in Scotland still don't want that action. It is a fallacy to suggest that because the Yes Movement have more seats in the Parliament, that actually they hold the majority and mandate to speak as the people, because actually they don't. They still only got less than 50% of the vote, even when you add them all up together. So the majority still want to remain part of the UK. But I think the biggest concern, if you look at it, would be things like that hard power, the relationship we have in terms of defence. Because at the moment, as part of NATO, the UK sits on NATO, that northern defence ring, a lot of it sits in Scotland, and the SNP and the Greens have said they want to make Scotland free from nuclear weapons. And that would mean removing that defence shield that currently sits at the top of the UK. I also think it would be problematic because it would create hard borders. There is no way now we've left the EU, that you can ignore the fact that if Scotland left the UK, and particularly if it tried to become part of the EU, that a border is going to be created, because Scotland would in effect become a foreign country. And if it joined the EU, it would be part of the bloc. Now, again, that's going to be a long and tortuous journey. But I think in the short term, the EU would use Scotland leaving the UK to basically be even more difficult in its relationships with the UK. It would celebrate it, it would crow about it, but actually it wouldn't then turn around and let Scotland in. Scotland would still have to meet the requirements of the EU. And frankly, Scotland is not going to be a net contributor to the EU's budget, and they're certainly not going to want to take on another country that has financial difficulties. And Scotland has a very large deficit.
But that's a problem. I don't think Scotland, by the EU's rules, has the wherewithal to actually join, does it? I mean, that seems to be the issue. No. And the nuclear deterrent thing is also a huge problem.
Yes, it is. And I think this sort of confused position that the SNP particularly have promulgated, that they want Scotland to be nuclear free, but they want to be part of NATO, is just absolute nonsense. And it absolutely underpins the problem that the SNP have, in that their policies are very confused underneath when it comes to independence.
And the other thing that I did, that finally, the one thing you mentioned about the hard border, which obviously we're already experiencing all sorts of issues with Northern Ireland at the moment. But, if Scotland becomes a foreign country and we have that hard border, then does that make Scottish people wanting to come and work in England, for example, then face all sorts of difficulties with doing that? And we know there's an awful lot of Scottish people that do come and work in England.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a huge unknown around it. And I mean, the SNP have been campaigning for an independent Scotland, for 70 odd years. I think it might even be longer than that now, 80 odd years. And they still can't lay out what Scotland would be like, how it would be run, what currency would have, how it would operate, how borders would work, how trade would work. You'd think after all these years they would have some answers, but they don't. And I think the reason they don't is because actually we are 4 nations, 1 country. We are a family in the UK. And, when you tear a family apart, they can not speak to each other for a while, they can argue, they can have differences. But in the end, as I say, blood is thicker than water. You tend to come back round the table. And I think that this is the point. Even if Scotland broke away, it would be very quickly back at the table saying, well, can we share this and can we do this together and can we have unity around that, which makes somewhat of a mockery of wanting to break away in the first place.
That's correct.
And, most of the trade is done across the border. For Scotland, most of our trade is with England. So, what's the logic of putting barriers in the way of that?